Welcome to the Ascent of Mount Carmel YouTube channel. In this chapter, St. John of the Cross tells us that our desire for worldly things don't just hold us back from progress toward divine union, they actually create evils within our souls. We'll talk about a couple of these evils today, and more in the weeks to come. The first evil is that our attachments deprive us of the Spirit of God. St. John writes, "It is clear from the very fact that the soul becomes affection to a thing, that the more the desire for that thing fills the soul, the less capacity the soul has for God, inasmuch as two contraries, according to the philosophers, cannot coexist in one person. When a person loves a creature, which is an attachment, it is the desire for the creature that fills the soul, pushing out room and time for God." Affection for God and affection for creatures are contraries. There cannot be contained within the will of a person affection for creatures and affection for God. For what has the creature to do with the Creator? What has the sensual to do with the spiritual, visible with the invisible, temporal with eternal? Food that is heavenly, spiritual, and pure, with food that is of sense alone and is purely sensual. Christ-like poverty of spirit with attachment to anything whatsoever. No form can be introduced unless the preceding contrary form is first expelled from the subject. The preceding form, while present, is an impediment to the other by reason of the contrariety which the two have between each other. And this is why we need to purge our desires for creatures. St. John says, "For as long as the soul is subjected to the sensual spirit, the spirit which is pure and spiritual cannot enter it." St. John cites a couple of verses of Scripture. "It is not good to take the bread of children and cast it to the dogs," and "Give not that which is holy to dogs."
Whoever feeds on or receives pleasure from creatures and attachments is compared in Scripture here to a dog, because they don't even desire to rise above feeding upon the creatures to seek nourishment from a more spiritual food. Like ravenous dogs, they're always hungry. They're always looking to eat. When they feed upon creatures, it only serves to whet their appetite rather than to satisfy their true hunger.
St. John says, "This is the nature of one that has desires. He is ever discontented and dissatisfied." No matter how much a person partakes of his pleasures, he'll never experience anything comparable to fullness, which is caused only by the Spirit of God. If a person ever wants to experience true fullness and satisfaction, he must first cast out the creatures, which are the things that are actually creating the hunger that exists in their souls. The contrary and battling desires and affections of these people are not harmless things. They are held in opposition to God. St. John of the Cross writes, "Let this suffice with respect to the first of the important evils which are inflicted upon the soul by the desires, namely, resistance to the Spirit of God." Let us now speak of the second effect which the desires cause in the soul. They weary the soul and torment and darken it, and they defile and weaken it.
A creature does to the soul similar to what a tapeworm does to the body. It's a parasite. This is because our desires are like spoiled children who are always demanding things from their mother, but are never satisfied and always want to be in the spotlight. Desires kind of make us like a crazy old prospector who has gold fever.
Men with greed in their hearts, ready to break their backs, to sell their very souls for gold.
The desire and greed compels him to keep on digging, even though it is tiring him out and destroying him. Even if he finds gold, he'll never be satisfied. He'll always be looking for that big strike. Now, I'm using this as a comparison, and I need to stress that our desires and attachments don't necessarily tire out the body, but they always tire out the soul.
St. John cites Isaiah, "As he that is hungry dreameth and eateth, but when he is awake his soul is empty. And as he that is thirsty dreameth and drinketh, and after he is awake, he is yet faint with thirst, and his soul is empty."
A good example of this is the desire for money. How many people ever feel that they have enough?
Love is a five-letter word. Yes, it is. It's simply M-O-N-E-Y.
Doesn't the constant struggle for more always leave us wearied and fatigued?
St. John tells us that this represents that worldly desires are never satisfied. St. John cites Job, "When he shall be filled, he shall be strained. He shall burn, and every sorrow shall fall upon him." Our desires for our addictions, creatures, and attachments and hobbies control us. When we give in to them, the soul becomes wearied and fatigued. When we feed upon them, our desires become even greater because there is no real sustenance in these creatures. St. John writes, "The soul is wearied and fatigued by its desires because it is wounded and moved and disturbed by them, as is water by the winds. And in just the same way, they disturb it, not allowing it to rest in any place or in anything whatsoever. This is like someone who loves somebody who doesn't love them back. The person who loves is wearied, fatigued, and frustrated when his attempts are in vain. A wild ass is accustomed in the wilderness and the desire of his heart, snuffed up the wind of his love. Keep thy foot from being bare, and thy throat from thirst. But thou sayest, I have lost all hope, I will not do it. I have loved after strangers, and I will walk after them.
When a soul doesn't have any wish to lift itself to something higher and greater, it just wears itself out on the creatures that it gives into.
Our desires for creatures can be compared to a fire. As we feed on our desires, it's like adding wood to the fire. The fire just consumes the wood and demands more. St. John writes, the soul is wearied and fatigued by all its desires and by indulging them, since they all cause the soul greater emptiness and hunger. For as often said, desire is like the fire, which increases as wood is thrown upon it, and after the fire consumes the wood, it dies. Actually, desires for creatures are worse than a fire because a fire goes down if it isn't fed more wood. But desire, though it increases when we keep feeding it, it doesn't just die out like a fire when we don't feed it. Instead, the soul grows weak through weariness because its hunger is increased when its food is diminished. It's actually just like a junkie needing another fix. For leaving aside that which alone can satisfy, which is God, they feed on that which causes them greater hunger, meaning the creatures. It is clear that the desires weary and fatigue the soul. And this is what our harmless pleasures do to us. Well, I hope you enjoyed this installment. We'll be back again in about a week with another one, but in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page, which is linked down below. Every day I add additional content that you won't see on this YouTube channel. Please check out the Ascent of Mount Carmel group, which is a study group based on the book Ascent of Mount Carmel. That's also linked down below. And also, please pray for the church.
I'll tell you what love is, oh yeah, and this is no lie. Love is a 5-letter word.